The Story of Civilization, Part 2, The Life of Greece, being a history of Greek civilization from the beginnings, and of civilization in the Near East, from the death of Alexander to the Roman conquest, with an introduction on the prehistoric culture of Crete by Durant. We start Book 2, The Rise of Greece, 1000 to 480 BCE, with Chapter 4, Sparta, Part 1, The Environment of Greece. Let us take an atlas of the classic world and find our way among the neighbors of ancient Greece. By Greece, or Hellas, we shall mean all lands occupied in antiquity by peoples speaking Greek. We begin where many invaders entered, over the hills and through the valleys of Epirus. Here the ancestors of the Greeks must have tarried many a year, for they set up at Dodona a shrine to their thundering sky god Zeus. As late as the 5th century of the Greeks consulted the oracle there, and read the divine will in the clangor of cauldrons or the rustling leaves of the sacred oak. A lot of similarities between Zeus and Odin. Of course, you can use those names for the same aspect of divinity. Through southern Epirus flowed the river Acheron, amid ravines so dark and deep that Greek poets spoke of it as the portal or very scene of hell. In Homer's day, the Epirots were largely Greek in speech and ways, but then new waves of barbarism came down upon them from the north and dissuaded them from civilization. Farther up the Adriatic lay Ilaria, sparsely settled with untamed herdsmen who sold cattle and slaves for salt. On this coast, at Epidamnus, the Roman Dyrrachium, now Durazzo, Caesar disembarked his troops in pursuit of Pompeii. Across the Adriatic, the expanding Greeks snatched the lower coast from the native tribes and gave civilization to Italy. In the end, those native tribes would sweep back upon them, and one tribe, almost barbarous till Alexander's time, would swallow them up along with their motherland in an unprecedented empire. Beyond the Alps ranged the Gauls, who were to prove very friendly to the Greek city of Massalia, Marseille, or Marseille. You would never guess that, right? And, from the spelling. Because you look at the spelling and it's Marcellus, right? And at the western end of the Mediterranean lay Spain, already half civilized and fully exploited by the Phoenicians and Carthaginians. Phoenician kind of comes from the purple people or something. And the Carthaginians, when about 550, the Greeks established their timid colony at Emporias, on the coast of Africa, menacingly opposite Sicily, was Imperial Carthage, founded by Dido, or would have been Carthage, founded by Dido and the Phoenicians. Tradition said in 813 BCE, of course, no mere village but a city of 700,000 population, monopolizing the commerce of the western Mediterranean, dominating Utica, Hippo, and 300 other towns in Africa, and controlling prosperous lands, mines, and colonies in Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain. This fabulously wealthy metropolis was fated to lead the Oriental thrust against Greece in the west, as Persia would lead it in the east. Farther east, on the African coast, lay the prosperous Greek city of Cairene, against the dark Libyan hinterland, then Egypt. What's the Greek name for Egypt? Aegyptus, something like that. It was the belief of most Greeks that many elements of their civilization had come to them from Egypt. Their legends ascribe the foundation of several Greek cities to men who, like Cadmus and Danaus, had come from Egypt, or had brought Egyptian culture to Greece by way of Phoenicia or Crete. Phoenicia? Again, I don't have the Greek spellings for these at hand. Under the Sa'ite kings, 663 to 525 BCE, Egyptian commerce and art revived, and the ports of the Nile were for the first time open to Greek trade. From the 7th century onwards, many famous Greeks, Thales, Pythagoras, Solon, Plato, and Democritus may serve as examples, visited Egypt, and were much impressed by the fullness and antiquity of its culture. Here were no barbarians, but men who had a mature civilization and highly developed arts 2,000 years before the fall of Troy. "You Greeks," said an Egyptian priest to Solon, "are mere children, talkative and vain, and know nothing of the past." When Hecataeus of Miletus boasted to the Egyptian priests that he could trace his ancestry through 15 generations to a god, they quietly showed him in their sanctuaries the statues of 345 high priests, each the son of the preceding, making 345 generations since the gods had reigned on earth. And some interesting dates show up amongst all that. From the Egyptian cults of Isis and Osiris, in the belief of Greek scholars like Herodotus and Plutarch, came the Orphic doctrine of a judgment after death, and the resurrection ritual of Demeter and Persephone at Eleusis. Probably in Egypt, Thales of Miletus learned geometry, and Roacus and Theodorus of Samos picked up the art of hollow casting in bronze. In Egypt, the Greeks acquired new skills in pottery, textiles, metalworking, and ivory. There, as well as from the Assyrians, Phoenicians, and Hittites, Greek sculptors took the style of their early statues: flat-faced, slant-eyed, close-fisted, straight-limbed, stiff. The seated Charis from Miletus in the British Museum, or the head of Cleobis by Palamedes in the museum at Delphi, and the colonnades of Saqqara and Beni Hassan, as well as in the remains of Macedonian Greece. Greek architects found part of their inspiration for the fluted column and Doric style, and as Greece, in its youth, learned humbly from Egypt, so when it was exhausted it died. One might say, in the arms of Egypt. At Alexandria it merged its philosophies, its rites, and its gods with those of Egypt and Judea, in order that they might find a resurrected life in Rome and Christianity. Well, everything that Christianity taught was taught in one form before, right? Second only to Egypt's was the influence of Phoenicia. The enterprising merchants of Tyre and Sidon acted like a circulating medium in the transmission of culture, and stimulated every Mediterranean region with the sciences, techniques, arts, and cults of Egypt. and the Near East. They excelled and perhaps instructed the Greeks in the building of ships. They taught them better methods in metalworking, textiles, and dyes. They played a part with Crete and Asia Minor in passing on to Greece the Semitic form of the alphabet that had been developed in Egypt, Crete, and Syria. Further east, Babylonia gave to the Greeks its system of weights and measures. It's base 10, base 660, that sort of thing. Its water clock and sundial, its monetary units of obol, mina, and talent, its astronomical principles, instruments, records, and calculations, its sexagesimal system of dividing the year, the circle, and the 4 right angles that are subtended by a circle at its center into 360 parts, each of the 360 degrees into 60 minutes, and each of the minutes into 60 seconds. It was presumably his acquaintance with Egyptian and Babylonian astronomy that enabled Thales to predict an eclipse of the sun. Probably from Babylonia came Hesiod's notion of chaos as the origin of all things, and the story of Ishtar and Tammuz is suspiciously like those of Aphrodite and Adonis, Demeter and Persephone. Demeter and Persephone, Aphrodite and Adonis. Near the eastern end of the commercial complex that united this classic world lay the final enemy of Greece. In some ways, though few, the civilization of Persia was superior to that of contemporary Hellas, Greece. It produced a type of gentleman finer than the Greek in every respect, except that of intellectual keenness and education, and a system of imperial administration that easily excelled the clumsy hegemonies of Athens and Sparta, and lacked only the Greek passion for liberty. From Assyria, the Ionian Greeks took a measure of skill in animal statuary, a certain thickness of figure and flatness of drapery in their early sculpture, many decorative motifs in friezes and moldings, and occasionally a style of relief, as in the lovely stela of Aristion. Lydia maintained intimate relations with Ionia, and its brilliant capital, Sardis, was a clearinghouse for the traffic in goods and ideas between Mesopotamia and the Greek cities on the coast. The necessities of an extensive trade stimulated banking and caused the Lydian government, about 680, to issue a state-guaranteed coinage. This boon to trade was soon imitated and improved by the Greeks, and had effects as momentous and interminable as those that came from the introduction of the alphabet. The influence of Phrygia was older and subtler. Its mother goddess, Cabela, entered directly and deviously into Greek religion, and its orgiastic flute music became that Phrygian mode, so popular among the populace, and so disturbing to the moralist of Greece. From Phrygia, this wild music crossed the Hellespont into Thrace, and served the rites of Dionysus. Yeah, the Phrygian mode and there's the different modes of music. We're going to name them after somebody. But I don't see one mode of music versus another sinister. That's, The god of wine was the chief gift of Thraca to Greece. But one Thracian city, Hellenized Abdera, sought to even the balance by giving Greece 3 philosophers, Leucippus, Democritus, Protagoras. It was from Thraca that the cult of the Muses passed down into Hellas, and the half-legendary founders of Greek music, Orpheus, Musaeus, and Thamyris, were Thracian singers and bards. From Thrace, we move southward into Macedonia, and our cultural circumvallation of Greece is complete. It is a picturesque land with a soil once rich in minerals, plains fertile in grain and fruit, and mountains disciplining a hardy stock that was destined to conquer Greece. The mountaineers and peasants were of mixed race, predominantly Illyrian and Thracian. Perhaps they were akin to the Dorians, who conquered the Peloponnesus. The ruling aristocracy claimed Hellenic lineage from Heracles himself and spoke a dialect of Greek. The earlier capital, Edessa, stood on a vast plateau between the plains that stretched to Epirus and the ranges that reached to the Aegean. Further east lay Pella, capital of Philip and Alexander, and near the sea was Pydna, where the Romans would conquer the conquering Macedonians and win the right to transmit Greek civilization to the Western world. This then was the environment of Greece. Civilizations like Egypt, Crete, and Mesopotamia that gave it those elements of technology, science, and art which it would transform into the highest picture in history. Empires like Persia, Carthage, that would feel the challenge of Greek commerce and would unite in a war to crush Greece, between them into a harmless vassalage. And in the north, warlike hordes, recklessly breeding, restlessly marching, who would sooner or later pour down over the mountain barriers and do what the Dorians had done, break through what Cicero was to call the Greek border, woven on the barbarian robe, and destroy a civilization that they could not understand. Hardly any of these surrounding nations cared for what, to the Greeks, was the very essence of life: liberty to be, to think, to speak, and to do. Every one of these peoples, except the Phoenicians, lived under despots, surrendered their souls to superstition and its small experience of the stimulus of freedom or the life of reason. Now, it's not right to call something superstitious just because it's not the same religion as yours. Like, for example, the Quran uses the term Jibt, and it uses the term Tagut, and it's not the same thing as, That was why, Owen had small experiences, stimulus of freedom of life for reason. That was why the Greeks called them all, too indiscriminately, barbaroi. Barbarians. A barbarian was a man content to believe without reason and to live without liberty. Well, see, then the term doesn't work. If you're saying, well, they have a particular sounding language and we don't quite understand it, so it's, In the end, the two conceptions of life, the mysticism of the East and the rationalism of the West, would fight for the body and soul of Greece. Well, they can be fully combined, can't they? Rationalism would win under Pericles, as under Caesar, Leo X, and Frederick. But mysticism would always return. The alternate victories of these complementary philosophies and the vast pendulum of history constitute the essential biography of Western civilization, while the Apollonian and the Dionysian, as some might call it,